Good evening and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Wednesday, the 30th of May, 2012. We've all been hearing about the increasing population of minority groups in the United States compared to the so-called Anglo or white majority. In fact, the U.S. Census Bureau now reports that more than half of all new births in this country are to minority parents, and people of Hispanic ancestry make up the largest piece of that pie. Joining us to talk about some of the numbers and possible implications is Leah Marquez-Peterson. She is the president and CEO of the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Leah, thanks for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
So you are not surprised by the numbers that have recently come out from the U.S. Census Bureau?
No, I mean, this is a message we talk about quite often at the Tucson Hispanic Chamber, what the implications are on all different sectors within our community. So not surprised with the numbers.
And let's talk about the implications. We are going to break it up into a few categories here, the economic implications of this.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You hear a lot of these national numbers, and I think it certainly resounds with a lot of people in our community. But what does it mean to Pima County? Actually, by 2030, we will be a majority Latino here in Pima County, is what they estimate with the census data. So we talk to a lot of our business partners and businesses that are members of the chamber about what they're doing to reach this fast-growing demographic. So a lot of it is from a marketing perspective. I think a lot of businesses in different industries need to be looking at just what this fast-growing trend means.
And what are some of the tips that you have? Because it's not always about carrying the message in Spanish, because a lot of so-called Latinos, Hispanics don't even speak Spanish anymore.
Right. It's interesting. A lot of people come to us thinking, I just need translation services. Translate my brochure and I'm done. And we know that that's not the case. A lot of it comes down to being bilingual, bicultural, really understanding what the implications are in your particular industry. As an example, I'd recently met with a hospital organization that was talking about their women's centers, birthing centers, and the impact of a Latina woman perhaps giving birth and more of the family attending, and what the changes might be in some of the food offerings and different service offerings they provide. And I think every industry really needs to look at that.
And what about the educational implications of this fast-growing segment of the population?
I think this is also not a surprising trend. In Pima County, 6 out of every 10 students in K through 12 are Hispanic now. So what does that mean to our growing population? The youth of tomorrow is really the Hispanic community. So what does that mean to different educational offerings? We've certainly seen the controversy within TUSD and some of those implications. But I think this is something that all school districts need to take attention to.
You mentioned working with a hospital. What about in healthcare? When it comes to healthcare, what will this all mean, if anything?
One of the things that we've studied within our Tucson Hispanic Chamber are some of the health disparities. So the dominance, I guess, of obesity and diabetes and some other diseases that you see in the Hispanic community and the Native American community, and what healthcare insurance companies or care agencies can be doing to help address that. I mean, that's something, as this trend or this growth in the Hispanic community comes forward, the healthcare industry really needs to be taking a look at.
And of course, when you talk about a growing presence of a certain population, sometimes it can translate into increased political clout when people become active and vote. What is your take on that?
We're having a lot of dialogue right now with both the Republican and Democrat leadership about the importance of the Latino vote. Some incredible numbers, certainly people getting registered and showing up at the polls, and both parties, and I think all the candidates are noticing that. So I think that's an important component for any candidate or anyone working, even a citizen initiative. I know we have a number of them on the ballot coming up in November. They need to be paying attention to.
Do you think that, at least in southern Arizona, compared to other communities around the country, sometimes people have not been really addressed, or their desires have not really been well taken care of? Do you think that's going to change with the growing number of people here from this community?
I think we're hearing, even at the national level and the local level, that there are a number of eligible voters that are Latino that are not registered to vote. I know we've partnered with an organization called Mi Familia Vota to do outreach, grassroots, door-to-door, and I think that's going to be very valuable. But getting people to the polls, regardless of ethnicity, is important. And I think that's important that we all have a voice in the community.
And then what do you use your message when it comes to referring to the so-called Hispanic population or Latino population? Sometimes people make the assumption that everybody eats the same food, they like the same things, and that's obviously not the case.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The Hispanic community is not homogeneous. It's something, even as you're defining what the Hispanic vote might be, or how you reach Hispanics in a particular industry. It's really understanding the Hispanic community in your particular area. I mean, we know here we have more Mexican American, that's defining our Hispanic community, but throughout the nation, whether you're talking to Hispanics in Miami, who might be of Cuban descent, or New York, Puerto Rican, and New Mexico, it's a very different Hispanic community dialogue to have. We also differentiate here in our Hispanic chamber between Hispanics in Arizona and Mexican nationals. Those are two entirely different markets for businesses and other industries to focus on.
Okay, and finally, what would you like to say about the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce? I know you recently moved back into your headquarters there on Speedway Boulevard.
We did. Very excited to be back in our building at Speedway in Euclid. We have reached almost 1,000 member businesses, so it's a milestone for us, and that's very exciting. We have offices in Tucson and in Hermosillo, so we welcome anyone to come on by and take a look.
All right, Leah Marquez Peterson, President, CEO of Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here in Tucson. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Immigration, both legal and illegal, is said to be the biggest factor for the increasing population in the United States, but recent statistics indicate a significant decline in the number of apprehensions along the U.S.-Mexico border. We are joined by Elise Golub to expand on this topic. She is the Executive Director of the National Center for Border Security and Immigration, which is based at the University of Arizona. Thank you very much for being here.
A pleasure. Thank you, Tony.
So what do you make of these numbers that say that there's apprehensions apparently at a 40-year low along the U.S.-Mexico border?
That is correct. The apprehensions are at a historic low in all the sectors along the U.S.-Mexican border. But the bigger issue to address is, what do these numbers mean? There have been times in past history when apprehensions were at a record rate, and it was touted as an achievement for Border Patrol for apprehending more people and being more efficient for their job. When the apprehension rates are low, it could also be viewed in a positive way, saying that border security enforcement has become more effective, and it's had a deterrent factor on people migrating from Mexico. Also, it's important to look at other reasons that may contribute to the decline in the apprehension numbers. Are people less likely to come from Mexico to the U.S. because of the slump in the U.S. economy and there are not job opportunities? And if so, which is a likely supposition, how do we parse out the different causes for the low rate of migration to the U.S.?
So your office is involved in several projects or areas. Let's talk about one of them that you are working on right now. It's called Avatar. What is that all about?
The Avatar is our favorite project. The Avatar came out of 30 years of research at the University of Arizona, looking at a non-invasive, non-intrusive way of measuring credibility assessment, seeing if a person is telling the truth or not. With the Avatar, we've examined over 200 different cues of deception and tested out different sensors that measure if a person is telling a lie or not. We've taken the most promising sensors and embedded them in a kiosk, kind of looks like an ATM, with a graphic interface of a customs officer on there. And when a person goes up to the Avatar will ask questions. What is the purpose of your coming across the border? What do you plan to do here today? What other places have you visited recently? And while the interview is conducted, the Avatar is measuring through its sensors different cues of credibility. And the ultimate goal is that real-time output on these sensors is given to an officer who will use this information to make a decision as to whether the person is here for benign purposes or they have some malintent.
And you say this is important because the average agent along the border probably sees hundreds or thousands of people every day, doesn't have a lot of time to try to gauge what the truthful purpose is of each visitor.
Exactly. The average officer has about 7 to 8 seconds to make a determination whether this person should go through or not. During those 7 to 8 seconds, he or she also has to look at the documents that the person is carrying. They may be checking databases, plus giving a visual inspection of the person. This slows down the border crossing times for travelers and business people coming through. So anything that we can do to alleviate the workload on officers while providing them with better information is a win-win for DHS and for our researchers.
So this is being tested right now. Any idea when it might go to market, if it does at all?
Right now it's being tested in Nogales at the Century Enrollment Center for Trusted Travelers. We're doing the second phase of our pilot tests. We just taught our avatar to speak Spanish. And we're probably a couple of years away from commercialization because every time we test it, we learn a lot more than we knew before.
All right, we only have about 30 seconds, but what do you think the future is of so-called comprehensive immigration reform when it comes to the United States and other countries south of the border?
I think we need to figure it out, and we need to figure it out quickly. We need, as the U.S. population ages, we need a young workforce to fill jobs in this country, and the Latin American and South American countries have a much younger workforce, a younger population, so we need to think about that. We need to think about the large number of children who were born here in America to parents without citizenship status. So these are all compelling issues that are not going away.
Okay, well, Dr. Elise Golub, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now we take you to another border in Mexico, except this one is further south with the Central American nation of Guatemala. Andrea Kelly has an interview with 2 University of Arizona graduate students who just returned from that region, where they studied various topics that deal with immigration and public health.
Joining us in the studio now is Emily Coyle and Zandra Alford, both graduate students in the U of A Zuckerman College of Public Health. You both just returned from a trip to the Mexico-Guatemala border. Can you tell us what you were doing there?
Yes, so with our trip, we were hoping to see similarities between the Mexican and U.S. border with the Mexican-Guatemala border. We had actually just come back from a trip earlier this year in the Mexican-U.S. border at Douglas Agua Prieta. So we were hoping to see similarities in health and also root causes of migration and how that affects migration, the effect it was having on health of the people in that area.
And Emily, did you find out any new things or unexpected things?
It was pretty interesting to see that a lot of the issues are very similar to what we see at the U.S.-Mexico border in terms of some common themes. I mean, one of the issues that we looked at was the effect of economics on migration, and it's important to remember that migration doesn't just happen from Mexico to the U.S. There's also migration taking place from South America, Central America, up into Mexico. So we did see that there are some issues with border enforcement, health concerns, vector-borne diseases, diabetes, gastrointestinal diseases that were present at both borders. But then at the same time, there are a lot of differences as well. People aren't necessarily, for example, if people are migrating from Guatemala to Mexico to work in the coffee farms, they're going right back to Guatemala, after a few months and coming back and forth. So rather than leaving one community for several years, they can leave and come back. So that was one point that we found kind of interesting.
And Zandra, how did you guys do your work while you were there? I mean, I know you were there to bring some of the things you've learned at this border down to the other border, but you also did some interviews and talked with migrants.
Yes, we definitely did a lot of interviews with migrants, with people in the community, the communities we were visiting, as well as different organizations down there. One organization we worked a lot with was the International Organization of Migration, and we worked with them on both the Mexican side of the border as well as the Guatemalan side. So taking, our knowledge of the border up here and sharing it with them, and also also receiving information from them about what's happening, what they're seeing on their border specifically.
And you've brought with you a lot of photos about the trip. Any specifically you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, there was one of the issues that really spoke to me was the issue of family separation. And, that's, when you look at public health, we're not just talking about diseases, we're talking about the whole complete physical, mental, and emotional, health of a person. And family separation is a major issue in that area. A lot of the migrants that we met at the migrant shelters were trying to reunite with families. And there's one picture that, one man who really spoke to me, he's holding a picture of his son and he's trying to reunite with his son. And yet he wasn't sure that he could actually make the journey because of health. And we all know too that there are many dangers. And some of the people who are trying to smuggle migrants across the border are telling them it's only going to be 12 hours, once you get to the desert. And we know that that's not true. So we are trying to help them understand that there are a lot of risks that they may not be aware of. There's sexual abuse. There's violence. There's kidnapping. There's drug smuggling that people may not be aware of when they're traveling out of their own communities.
And in addition to that, the climate is very different. So a lot of these people coming from these communities in Chiapas and Guatemala aren't used to a desert environment. It's very tropical down there. So knowing the hazards, knowing what to expect in the desert can be very hard if you've never actually seen it or experienced it in your life.
And also one of the things that you both mentioned to me before we were doing this interview is the notion that disease and health knows no borders. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw?
Yeah, we actually have one of our photos that talks a bit about that, and it talks about how HIV is, it's a fluid disease. It doesn't respect borders, and that's something you see not with just transmittable diseases like HIV, but diabetes. Dengue is an issue that's coming back as well. So we definitely saw a lot of those issues coming up, and the fact that health it's fluid and borders aren't, it's not something that's going to stop a health issue. And
another issue with that is too, at both borders, the populations are vulnerable because they're kind of under the radar. I mean, they may not be traveling legally in many cases, and so therefore they're not seeking out services for fear in both countries, in Mexico and up in the northern borders. They may not be seeking out health services, so they're more susceptible to chronic conditions as well. Yeah.
We've got less than a minute left, but I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the coffee collective that you visited and some of the families you stayed with while you were there.
Yeah, well, I had the honor of staying with a wonderful family while I was there. It was actually Mama Yoli's family, and it was a really wonderful experience. I was with another student who had spent time with them about 4 years earlier. He had spent 8 months there, so it was kind of like his second family. And we had just a wonderful, warm, welcoming environment. There was also a young boy named Arturito who actually became our photographer while we were there for some bit of the time. But just a wonderful, warm environment. Just really great to see.
The cooperative is called Cafe Justo, and it's a Fair Trade Plus coffee cooperative. So all the farmers will sell their coffee to the local cooperative, and in exchange, they're kind of taking out the middleman. What it creates for them is to be able to sell their coffee for a fair price, and they can receive livable wages and livable payment for that, and then, that reduces the need for them to migrate.
Yeah, it's also brought water to their community, more clean water, so it's a great
Well, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Bees are small but hardworking insects that provide the valuable benefit of pollination. And experts say if you were to put a price tag on it, it would be a multi-billion-dollar service every year. Here in southern Arizona, urban beekeepers get a chance to work very close to their flying friends while keeping this ancient hobby alive. Luis Carrion has that story.
Spring has arrived in the southwest, and here in the old pueblo, the first wave of flowers have started to add color to our urban environment. Pollinators have become active and are busy feeding on the new blossoms.
But usually, I think of late March, early April.
Linda McKittrick is a beekeeper. an urban beekeeper to be more precise.
They attach the wax on top and build like this. So it is more like nature intended.
She says her colonies of bees are just now becoming active after the overwinter stage, which begins here in the Southwest around November.
Basically, they begin to shut down their brood cycle for the winter, and they want to preserve the resources. One bee colony is its own kind of super creature. They don't think in terms of individual bees. They think in terms of the whole, if you will. So they kick out the drones since they don't really contribute much, and they tend to be a drag on the resources. People have fruit trees and gardens, and all that's very helpful, but it isn't like a flow. When all the mesquite bloom here, you can actually hear bees, in the trees.
McKittrick says that the big honey flows have not started yet, but the activity she sees in her hives suggests that the swarming has begun, and the season might come earlier than usual. In her small backyard apiary, she has the traditional frame hives. The bees enter through a small opening and build their hives on pre-made structures.
Whenever we have a hive that looks like it's changing, becoming more defensive, I watch it very carefully because I don't want to have defensive bees in the city. When I open this up, you can see the difference between the top bar hive and this.
As an urban beekeeper, she says it's important to be vigilant about the disposition of her bees to ensure that they are not aggressive, and she closely monitors their disposition so they do not pose a threat to the neighborhood.
So here you can see what's happening spring-wise. This is not brimming over with honey. And remember, we didn't harvest at the end of the year. So this is great that they still have honey. This is capped honey. This is non-capped honey. And if you can see it shimmering in there, they're putting nectar in. So the beginning of spring honey is beginning. This is not old honey that they're eating. They're bringing it in. So that's lovely.
McKittrick says it's easy to see the beauty in the bees when you spend time with them. And she's also incorporated a less common beehive structure known as the Kenya top bar hive.
This is a top bar hive.
This hive more closely mimics their natural homes.
If this hive feels like it needs a new queen or that it's run out of space, it'll begin raising a new queen or multiple queens. The brood is right here, the nursery, and then there's some honey, and this is probably empty. And this is what they call a follower board. So in the spring and summer, this will be filled to here. Here you can see where the honey had attached.
McKittrick says this design allows the bees to remain relatively undisturbed when she works with them. And it also allows for easier access to the honey and wax during the harvest.
One of the pros of this kind of hive is that I think it's easier on the beekeeper's back. Here you can see it also. So I'm just going to remove this follower board and see what's going on. I think there isn't a lot going on. Here you can see that they're able to build more like they do in a tree trunk, right? When you're working with bees, it's just good to be aware of where you are. I like to use all my senses. I like to listen to what's going on in a hive. I like to see what's going on.
McKittrick says her apiary is well integrated into her neighborhood, and she takes precautions to ensure that it is not a disruption. And she says the recent renaissance of the urban beekeeping practice is tied to people's desires to reconnect with local, organic, and sustainable food systems.
I'm guessing that urban beekeeping is more like it used to be in the old days. My grandmother died at 110 last August, and I used to go up for Sunday brunches with her up in Sun City, and we would sit around these tables, and I would ask people about their lives, and almost every single person there had grown up as a young person in their 90s, now they were in their 90s or 100s, had grown up around bees. Their fathers or grandfathers had kept bees, and they were all over the United States. So I think urban beekeeping may be now, the interest in bees, maybe a return to the way people used to live, where they had a hive or two for honey.
For honey, for wax, and for the service they provide as pollinators, honeybees are an important part of our urban landscape. And McKittrick points out that because of the diversity of their habitat, they have largely been unaffected by the recent colony collapse disorder that has devastated the commercial beekeeping industry.
This is really one of the most beautiful things, I think, in nature.
Now we go to political reporter Christopher Conover and this week's edition of Political Focus.
Memorial Day has passed, which marks the unofficial beginning of summer, and in political circles it also signals the time when campaigning kicks off. Part of that process is qualifying for the ballot, and that happened today as hundreds of candidates across Arizona submitted their paperwork to the Secretary of State's office in order to get on the ballot for the August primary. This year, Arizona voters will vote in a U.S. Senate race, as well as races for 9 congressional seats, including a new one thanks to redistricting, as well as every district in the legislature. Locally, the entire Pima County Board of Supervisors is facing voters, as are most school board members. To get on the ballot, candidates must submit signatures gathered in their district. The number of signatures needed varies with the size of the district and the number of partisan voters in that district. Now that the signatures are in the possession of the Secretary of State, they can be challenged by outside groups, which means some who submitted their paperwork still could end up without a place on the ballot. In the coming weeks, we'll be adding candidate bios and forums to our website, so stay tuned to Your Vote 2012 at azpm.org. And that's this week's Political Focus.
Like the United States, many countries south of the border have cultural connections to other parts of the world due to the influence of millions of different settlers. In tonight's video postcard from photographer and editor Jonathan Dinayasi, we take you to Catalina High School in Tucson, where Rhythms of Brazil recently performed different cultural pieces. They included the Brazilian martial arts form capoeira. You can get more news and information on our website, azpm.org. To comment on any story you saw tonight, click on it online and go to the bottom. We can also be reached via Facebook and Twitter. Coming up tomorrow night, we'll talk to the new president and CEO of the Metropolitan Tucson Convention and Visitors Bureau about his goals for the group, and getting more money is one of them. Also, we'll tell you about the new seasons that are coming up for UA Presents, as well as the Arizona Theater Company. I'm Tony Paniagua. Have a great night.